The arrival of the unstoppable fleet. The sky above Earth burned with an eerie green glow. The Excelvarian fleet had arrived. Thousands of massive warships hovered above the planet, their dark metal hulls blocking out the sun. The invasion had begun. Queen Zara, the unbreakable, stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Dominion, her 4 golden eyes scanning the planet below. She was tall and regal, her deep violet skin shimmering under the soft glow of the ship's control panels. She had conquered over 100 planets. No species had ever stood against her empire for more than 3 days. And now, Earth would fall like the rest. Zara let out a quiet laugh as she watched her generals prepare for the first strike. Humans, they tell stories of warriors, of courage, of defiance. She shook her head. I have seen their kind before. Weak, fragile. And when the time comes, they break. Her second in command, General Cora, bowed her head. Your Majesty, our forces are ready. We have scanned their defenses. Their technology is primitive, their weapons outdated. Zara smirked. Then let's begin. The first attack. Across the world, the people of Earth looked up in fear as the Excelvarian assault began. The first wave of attack ships descended from the sky, their weapons glowing with plasma energy. The world's military forces scrambled to respond. Fighter jets took off, missiles were launched, and cities activated their defenses. But against the sheer power of the Excelvarian Empire, it felt like ants fighting a storm. In New York, plasma fire rained from the sky, turning streets into molten craters. In Tokyo, energy blasts shattered skyscrapers, sending glass and steel crashing to the ground. In London, the air was thick with smoke as Excelvarian dropships landed, unloading their heavily armored troops. On the Dominion, Queen Zara watched it all unfold with a satisfied smile. They fight, she mused. Good. I prefer it that way. The resistance that shouldn't exist. But then, something unexpected happened. The humans did not break. Instead of fleeing, they'd fought back, and not just with weapons, but with strategy, with traps, with a level of resistance the Excelvarians had never faced before. In New York, a plasma tank battalion was ambushed in the subway tunnels, their machines crushed by explosive charges. In Tokyo, snipers targeted Excelvarian officers, taking them down one by one. In London, civilians joined the fight, throwing Molotov cocktails and using EMP bombs to disable alien war machines. General Cora frowned as she read the battle reports. Your Majesty, this is unusual. Most species surrender by now. Zara's golden eyes narrowed. They are only delaying the inevitable. But deep inside, something unsettled her. The humans were not fighting for survival. No, they fought with rage, with purpose, and that was something far more dangerous. Whispers of the butcher. As the battle continued, strange rumors began to spread among the Excelvarian forces. Soldiers spoke of a warrior, a human fighter who moved like a shadow, who tore through entire squads without a single gunshot. He fights with his hands, a wounded Excelvarian officer reported in a trembling voice. He doesn't use weapons. He breaks bones, crushes skulls. He doesn't leave survivors. Zara laughed when she first heard the rumors. Another foolish legend. We have heard such things before. But then came the footage. A squad of 10 Excelvarian warriors entered a ruined building in Los Angeles. They were searching for survivors. The helmet camera of one soldier showed what happened next. A shadow moved, a blur of motion. Then, screams. The footage was brief, filled with static and chaos. But in the final seconds, one chilling image appeared. A man standing over a pile of dead Excelvarians, his hands covered in their blood. His face was hidden in darkness. The butcher. Zara leaned forward, intrigued. This is interesting. A challenge to the queen. For the first time in her long reign, Queen Zara felt curious. Who was this human warrior? Was he truly just a man, or something more? She turned to her generals. I will go to Earth myself. The command deck fell silent. General Cora's face paled. "Your Majesty, that is too dangerous." Ziara smirked. "Danger? From a human?" She chuckled. "I want to meet this butcher, and when I do, I will show him what true power looks like." Outside, the battle for Earth raged on. But deep in the ruins of Los Angeles, the butcher waited. And he was ready. The battlefield nightmare, a silent battlefield. The city of Los Angeles was dead. Once a beacon of human civilization, it now lay in ruin. Skyscrapers stood as hollowed-out skeletons, their glass shattered, their steel frames twisted by the heat of war. Smoke curled into the darkened sky, casting eerie shadows across the wreckage. Fires burned in the distance, flickering like the last breaths of a dying world. Queen Ziara stood atop the wreckage of what was once a human military base, her golden eyes scanning the ruins. Around her, Xelvarian war machines patrolled the streets, their glowing blue sensors sweeping for survivors. The battle should have been over by now. Humans should have surrendered. But they hadn't. The reports from her commanders were troubling. Her best generals were dead. Entire squads of elite warriors had vanished, and worst of all, fear had begun to spread among her troops. The whispers continued to grow. "He's out there. The butcher is watching. No one survives him." Ziara clenched her fists. Fear had no place in her empire. She needed to end this rebellion herself. She turned to General Cora, her most trusted advisor. "Deploy a full battalion. I want every inch of this city searched. Find this butcher or burn what remains of Earth to the ground." Cora hesitated, something she had never done before. "Your Majesty, I believe we should reconsider." Ziara raised an eyebrow. "Explain yourself." Cora took a deep breath. "This is different. We have conquered hundreds of planets, but this is not a normal war. The humans, they do not fear us the way others did. They fight not just to survive, but with something deeper, something dangerous." Ziara scoffed. "Hope." Cora shook her head. "Hatred." For the first time, Queen Ziara felt something she had never felt before. A slight, almost imperceptible, chill. The trap that swallowed an army. The Xelvarian response was swift and merciless. Hundreds of alien soldiers moved through the streets, their plasma rifles charged, their scanners sweeping for heat signatures. They tore apart every building, every hiding place. But the city was too quiet, too empty. Something was wrong. Then, the first explosion. A massive fireball erupted in Sector 7, swallowing an entire squad. The blast shattered nearby windows, sending debris flying like deadly shrapnel. Screams filled the comms. A second explosion in Sector 9. Another squad gone. Panic rippled through the Xelvarian ranks. This was not a random resistance. This was a trap. The streets of Los Angeles became a maze of death. EMP bombs disabled Xelvarian armor. Hidden snipers took out squad leaders one by one. Hack drones turned against their alien masters, raining bullets from above. The Xelvarians, the galaxy's most feared conquerors, were being hunted like animals. Then, the radio silence began. Squads stopped reporting back. Their signals went dark. And somewhere in the heart of the ruins, an unseen force was tearing through the invaders with terrifying precision. The Butcher Strikes. A 6-man Xelvarian unit moved cautiously through the remains of a collapsed shopping mall. Their weapons were raised, their nerves on edge. They had seen the footage. They had heard the screams. Something was out there. Then, a sound. A faint crunch of debris underfoot. The squad turned, weapons aimed at the darkness. Their leader, Captain Zaratel, activated her visor's thermal scan. The screen flickered then. A figure. Moving. Fast. Zaratel barely had time to react before the first soldier vanished. A shadow lunged from the darkness, and in the blink of an eye, a sickening crunch. The second soldier fired blindly, his plasma shots illuminating a horrifying scene. A human, covered in blood, standing over their fallen comrade. He had no armor, no advanced weapons, only his hands. A blur of motion, a scream. A second soldier fell. Ketaratel panicked, opening fire, but the human was too fast. He ducked, weaving through the plasma fire like a ghost. In seconds, he was behind her. A sharp crack. Her arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Another crack. Her knee shattered. She collapsed, gasping in pain. The last thing she saw was his cold, emotionless eyes staring down at her. Then, darkness. The Queen's fury. Back on the Dominion, Queen Zira stared at the screen, her hands tightening into fists. The footage had been recovered from Zaratel's broken visor. The human had moved with inhuman speed. He fought with raw brutality. He did not hesitate. He did not speak. And most importantly, he did not fear them. Zira took a slow breath. For the first time in her reign, she felt something alien to her. Not anger, not hatred, but a feeling she had never encountered before. Uncertainty. She turned to General Cora. "Tell me, do humans have a name for this kind of warrior?" Cora hesitated before responding. "They call him the Butcher." The Queen exhaled slowly, then she smiled. "If he is so powerful," she murmured, "then I will face him myself." The order was given. Queen Zira would descend to Earth, and she would end this butcher with her own hands. Or so she thought. The legend of the Butcher. A queen's growing doubt. For the first time in her reign, Queen Zira could not sleep. She sat alone in her private chamber aboard the Dominion, staring at the holographic display before her. The footage played on a loop, the massacre at Los Angeles, the terror in her soldiers' voices, the shadow moving in the ruins, and then darkness. This wasn't war. This was something else entirely. Her empire had conquered 100 planets, destroyed thousands of civilizations. None had resisted like this. None had fought like this. She clenched her fists. It was impossible. Humans were weak, inferior, primitive. They should have broken under the might of the Xelvarian Empire. They should have submitted by now. Yet here they stood, defiant, like cornered beasts with nothing left to lose. And at the center of it all, the Butcher. Queen Zira leaned forward, rewinding the footage to a single frame, a blurry image of a man standing over the bodies of her finest warriors. No armor, no weapons, just his hands. Zira exhaled, her golden eyes narrowing. "I will kill him myself." Her voice echoed through the chamber. And this time, she felt no doubt. The nightmare spreads. Down on Earth, the legend of the Butcher spread like wildfire. Across battlefields, Xelvarian soldiers whispered in hushed voices. Fear had rooted itself deep within their ranks. Even the strongest of warriors hesitated before stepping into the ruined cities. The Butcher was not human, they began to say. "He is a demon," some claimed. "He hunts us from the shadows," others whispered. "He feels no pain. He does not bleed." In Paris, an entire squad vanished overnight. The last radio transmission was nothing but ragged breathing, and then silence. In Moscow, a Xelvarian war machine was found destroyed with its pilot's body torn apart inside. In Berlin, a Xelvarian officer was dragged into the sewers and never seen again. It didn't matter that no one had actually seen the Butcher up close. It didn't matter that no one truly knew his name. What mattered was that fear had taken hold of the Xelvarian army. And once fear enters a soldier's mind, the battle is already lost. The resistance's last hope. Far from the battlefield, deep in a hidden bunker beneath Washington, D.C., the remnants of humanity's command sat in silence. A holographic display flickered in the dimly lit room, showing a map of the world and the losing battle they were fighting. General Elias Carter, the last standing leader of Earth's military forces, rubbed his temples. "We can't hold out much longer." A scientist, Dr. Helena Vasquez, shook her head. "We shouldn't be holding out at all. By every law of war, Earth should have been lost weeks ago. We're facing an empire with technology centuries ahead of us. And yet, Elias glanced at the display. The scattered reports from the front lines painted a strange picture. Zelvarian losses were higher than expected. Someone, was keeping humanity in the fight. One of the soldiers chuckled. "You mean the butcher?" Elias sighed. "Not this again. He's real," another soldier said. "I had a cousin stationed in Los Angeles. He said the butcher walks among the ruins, striking from the darkness, killing Zelvarians like animals." Dr. Vasquez frowned. "That doesn't make sense. No human can do what they say he does." The room fell silent. No one could explain it. And yet, a hunter in the ruins. Los Angeles had become a graveyard of metal and fire. Between the shattered skyscrapers, Zelvarian patrols moved carefully, their plasma rifles glowing in the dark. The soldiers' movements were tense, their fingers tight on their triggers. They weren't just fighting anymore. They were afraid. A group of 5 Zelvarians crept through the ruins of an old hotel, their sharp eyes scanning for movement. Something was watching them. They could feel it. "Scan the area," their commander, Sergeant Valtok, whispered. His second-in-command activated his visor's heat detection. Nothing. The air was still. Silent. Too silent. And then, a sound. A faint, deliberate tap on the rubble behind them. The squad turned, weapons raised. But there was nothing there. Silence. A soldier gulped, adjusting his grip. There's nothing here." Sergeant Valtok's eyes narrowed. "No, he's here." A blur of movement. A shadow lunged from above, dropping from the ceiling with terrifying speed. The first Zelvarian never even screamed. A sickening crunch echoed in the ruins as his neck twisted unnaturally. His body collapsed like a ragdoll. The second opened fire, but too late. The butcher was already moving, ducking beneath the plasma shots, closing the distance with inhuman speed. His fist struck like a hammer, shattering armor, breaking bones beneath it. Another snap, another soldier down. Panic set in. "Fall back." FAL. The third Zelvarian was cut short as the butcher grabbed him by the throat, lifting him effortlessly before slamming him into the ground with a force that cracked concrete. Only Sergeant Valtok remained. He scrambled backward, his plasma rifle shaking in his hands. His heart thundered in his chest. The butcher stepped forward, his eyes locked onto him. For the first time in his life, a Zelvarian warrior felt pure, primal terror. "What are you?" Valtok whispered. The butcher did not speak. He moved, a flash of motion, then blackness. The Queen's challenge. When news of yet another massacre reached Queen Ziara, she finally had enough. She slammed her fist onto the command table, cracking the reinforced surface. "This has gone on long enough," she growled. Her golden eyes burned with fury as she turned to her commanders. "I will not let a mere human humiliate my empire." She stepped forward, her voice echoing through the chamber. "I am Queen Ziara the Unbreakable. I do not run. I do not fear." She clenched her fists. "Prepare my ship. I will face him myself." The warrior and the queen. The queen descends. The sky above Earth rippled with fire as Queen Ziara's personal warship tore through the atmosphere. Its hull, a black obsidian masterpiece, reflected the glow of the burning cities below. Inside the command chamber, Ziara stood in silence, her hands clasped behind her back. The weight of the Zelvarian Empire rested on her shoulders, yet her golden eyes held only one thought: find him, face him, crush him. Her advisors had begged her not to come. They had pleaded, warning that the butcher was not normal, that something was wrong with this war. She ignored them all. She was Ziara the Unbreakable, and she would not let a single human warrior shatter the foundation of her empire. As the ship touched down in the ruins of Los Angeles, Ziara stepped forward, clad in her ceremonial battle armor, a sleek black exosuit infused with Zelvarian nanotech. It enhanced her strength, her reflexes, and her already formidable combat skills. She didn't need it, but she wanted no chance of failure. Around her, an army of 1,000 of her finest soldiers stood at attention, their weapons ready. She wasn't here to conquer anymore. She was here to kill a legend. The bait is set. The Queen's voice echoed across the ruined streets, broadcasted in every direction. Come out, human. Show yourself. The wind howled through the broken buildings. Fire flickered in the distance. Somewhere, in the ruins of a collapsed skyscraper, the last remnants of human resistance fighters watched in silence. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a reckoning. Ziara stepped forward, her gaze scanning the shadows. I grow tired of this game. She raised her hand, a signal. The Selverian soldiers activated their scanners. Thermal imaging, motion tracking. Nothing could hide from them. Yet, there was nothing. No heat signatures, no movements, just the stillness of a dead city. The tension grew. And then, a whisper, soft, close, from behind her. You shouldn't have come. The butcher reveals himself. Ziara spun around, her enhanced reflexes kicking in. But it was already too late. A dark figure emerged from the shadows of a broken skyscraper, stepping into the dim orange glow of the fires. The butcher. No armor, no helmet, no advanced weaponry. Just a man drenched in blood, his face cold, his eyes empty. For the first time, Ziara truly looked at him. He wasn't a mutant. He wasn't a monster. He was human. But there was something wrong with him. His muscles were tensed, coiled like a predator on the edge of a kill. His hands, scared, bruised, stained with alien blood, remained open at his sides. He didn't speak. He just watched her, unblinking, unmoving, waiting. The first strike. The Queen wasted no time. Her enhanced speed sent her lunging forward, her armored fist cutting through the air like a bullet. But the butcher was faster. He didn't block. He didn't dodge. He leaned just enough to let the blow pass. Ziara's strike shattered the concrete behind him, a crater exploding into the ground. And in that split second, she felt something she had never felt before. A sudden, sharp twist at her wrist. The butcher had grabbed her hand. And then, a crack. Ziara's arm snapped backward at an unnatural angle. Her mind barely had time to process it before a fist slammed into her stomach, sending her flying backward, crashing into a burned-out vehicle. Her vision blurred. Her enhanced armor absorbed most of the impact, but the shock still rattled her mind. Impossible. No one should be able to touch her. She stood, her breath steady, but her confidence shaken. She had underestimated him. The Queen versus the butcher. This was no ordinary fight. It was a duel between titans. Ziara attacked with blinding speed, her nanotech-enhanced strikes moving faster than human eyes could track. But the butcher matched her. He moved like a ghost, his feet barely making a sound as he weaved through her attacks, dodging with an unnatural precision. And then he struck. Not with brute force, not with rage, but with calculation. A strike to her knee joint, a sharp crack of metal. An elbow to her ribs, a fracture, a precise hit to her throat. Her breath hitched. Ziara stumbled backward. She had never been pushed this far before. The butcher wasn't fighting like a warrior. He was fighting like a man who had nothing left to lose, and that made him unstoppable. The moment of defeat. Ziara, panting, her golden eyes burning with frustration, lunged one final time. This time, she went for a kill strike, a direct punch to the skull. But the butcher sidestepped, and then his hand closed around her throat. With a single motion, he lifted her off the ground. The Queen of the Selverian Empire, helpless. Her soldiers watched in stunned silence. For the first time, the unbreakable Queen had been broken. The butcher pulled her closer, his voice finally breaking the silence. Do you know why you lost? Ziara struggled against his grip, her enhanced armor wearing, trying to recover. Because you don't understand humans. His voice was cold, empty. You fight for conquest, for power. We fight because you took everything from us. His grip tightened. Ziara felt fear. Real, raw, primal. She had never felt fear before. The butcher's choice. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, he let go. Ziara collapsed to the ground, gasping. She stared at him, bewildered. He had spared her. Why? The butcher took a step back, his eyes locked onto hers. This is your only warning. His voice was calm. Leave, take your army. Never come back. Ziara looked up at him, her pride burning inside her chest. She could still fight. She could still order her soldiers to kill him. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Because the butcher wasn't just a warrior. He was a symbol. And no empire, not even hers, could kill a symbol. The beginning of the end. Queen Ziara stood, her pride shattered, her empire on the verge of defeat. She looked around at her soldiers. Their faces were filled with doubt. She had no choice. With a single breath, she gave the order. Retreat. And for the first time in history, the Selvarian Empire fled. The duel that shook a civilization. The Queen's silence. For the first time in her life, Queen Ziara had lost. As she stood in the ruins of Los Angeles, surrounded by the wreckage of her fallen empire, her mind raced. She had fought in hundreds of battles. She had never tasted defeat. Until now. Her golden eyes locked onto the human warrior standing before her. He had no armor, no advanced technology, just his bare hands and a quiet, unshakable fury. And he had won. The butcher had her in his grasp. He could have crushed her throat, snapped her spine, ended her reign in seconds. But he let her go. Why? The queen of the Selvarian Empire did not understand mercy. Yet, for some reason, the butcher had shown it to her. Her warriors, her strongest soldiers, stood frozen in shock and fear. They had never seen her kneel. She clenched her fists. She had no choice but to order the retreat. The words burned her tongue. But even as the Selvarian ships began to lift off, even as the Empire fled Earth, Ziara's mind remained locked onto one single thought. This is not over. The butcher watches the sky. As the last of the Selvarian warships vanished into the stratosphere, the ruined city of Los Angeles fell into eerie silence. The resistance fighters hidden among the wreckage began to emerge, their faces a mix of disbelief and awe. Earth had won, not with diplomacy, not with superior firepower, but because of one man. The butcher stood still, watching the sky as the last alien ship disappeared into the void. His body was bruised, bleeding. His hands were coated in alien blood. But he did not collapse. He did not celebrate. He just breathed. Behind him, General Elias Carter, the last remaining leader of Earth's resistance, stepped forward, his uniform tattered, his face smeared with dirt and sweat. "My God," Carter whispered. He looked at the butcher with awe, and maybe even a little fear. "You really did it," Carter said, almost laughing. "You've scared them away." The butcher didn't answer. His cold, dead eyes still stared at the sky. Carter frowned. "It's over, son. You can rest." The butcher finally turned, his voice low and quiet. "No." Carter stiffened. "What do you mean, no?" The butcher wiped blood from his face, his jaw tightening. "She's coming back." Carter blinked. "You really think after this, she's—" "Yes." The butcher's voice was calm, certain, unshaken. "She's not the type to accept defeat. She's going to come back." He turned away. "And next time, she won't just bring an army." The Selvarian Empire trembles. Back on the Dominion, deep within the command chambers of the Selvarian High Council, chaos erupted. The news of Queen Ziara's defeat had spread like wildfire. Selvarian generals, warlords, and advisors shouted over each other, arguing in disbelief. Impossible. Earth is primitive. How could this happen? Has the queen gone mad? Ziara stood in the center of the chamber, her gaze cold and unreadable. She had told no one how she lost. She had given no explanation. Only one fact mattered. The Butcher had humiliated the greatest empire in the galaxy. For the first time in Selvarian history, they had been forced to retreat. A low voice interrupted the shouting. Perhaps humans are more dangerous than we thought. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the grand strategist, a shadowy figure who had led the Empire's greatest campaigns. He tapped his metallic fingers against the table, eyes locked onto Queen Ziara. I have studied thousands of civilizations, he mused, and never have I seen one that fights the way humans do. His gaze darkened. This was not a victory for Earth. This was a warning. He leaned forward, his voice like a blade. If one man could do this to us, imagine what will happen when humanity rises as a true force. Ziara didn't answer, but deep inside, she already knew. The real war hadn't even begun yet. The message sent across the stars. Back on Earth, in a hidden underground chamber beneath Washington, D.C., human scientists worked frantically. They had cracked the Selvarian communication systems, and they had intercepted a single message sent from Zara's warship as it retreated. A scientist, Dr. Helena Vasquez, stared at the screen in shock. General Carter leaned over her shoulder. What does it say? Vasquez swallowed. Her voice shook. It's a warning. Carter frowned. A warning. Vasquez slowly turned to him. She's warning the rest of the Empire. She took a breath. About us. Carter's blood ran cold. The Butcher stepped forward, reading the words himself. A long silence followed. Then, without turning, the Butcher muttered 5 chilling words. They won't make that mistake. The beginning of something greater. The stars above Earth remained silent. But the Butcher knew. The Selvarian Empire would return. This wasn't a victory. This was a spark. The first ember of something much bigger. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming. Because Earth had finally woken up. Because humanity had been pushed to the edge. And now, humanity was ready to push back. The fall of a queen's pride. A throne built on fear. Deep within the core of the Selvarian homeworld, the grand palace of Valazar loomed over the city like a monolith of power. Towering spires of black metal reached into the swirling red sky, humming with the energy of a civilization that had ruled the stars for millennia. Inside the palace, the Great Hall of Conquest was filled with the elite of the Empire, high-ranking warlords, military strategists, and advisors who had shaped the fate of countless worlds. But today, there was no celebration. Today, the throne stood empty. And at the center of the hall, Queen Ziara knelt before the Elder Council, her armor still scorched and battered from her duel on Earth. For the first time in her reign, she was not the one in control. She had returned to her people not as a conqueror, but as a failure. The air was thick with tension as the elders watched her in silence, their glowing eyes filled with disappointment. Finally, one of them spoke. You abandoned Earth. The words echoed through the chamber like a sentence being passed. Ziara clenched her fists but kept her head bowed. A second elder's voice rang out, sharp and cold. The great Ziara, the unbreakable, was broken. Murmurs spread through the hall, whispers of doubt and betrayal. The Empire had never lost a war, never surrendered a planet, until now. And it was all because of one human. The Council's verdict. The grand strategist stepped forward, his expression unreadable. His presence alone silenced the room. The Selvarian Empire has ruled because we are superior, he said, his voice like steel. Because we are stronger than the weak creatures we conquer. He looked down at Ziara, his golden eyes burning with quiet fury. But today, the galaxy knows that a single human made us run. He leaned closer. They are laughing at us, Queen Ziara. Ziara's muscles tensed, but she remained silent. The grand strategist continued. "We cannot afford to be humiliated." His voice was sharp as a blade. "You failed your mission. You failed the Empire." His words were deliberate, testing her. "Perhaps you are no longer fit to rule." Gasps filled the room. A challenge had been spoken aloud. For the first time in her life, Ziara felt something she had never known. Doubt. Had she truly lost her right to lead? Was she still worthy of her throne? Her pride screamed at her to fight back, to deny their accusations, to remind them that she was still Zara the unbreakable. But she couldn't, because no matter how much she wanted to deny it, she had lost. The Queen's fury. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, Zara slowly lifted her head. Her golden eyes burned with something new. Not anger, not shame, but purpose. She did not deny her failure. She did not make excuses. Instead, she spoke two words that sent chills through the entire hall. "Not yet." The grand strategist narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Ziara rose to her feet, standing tall despite the weight of the accusations against her. "I lost a battle," she admitted. Her voice was calm, steady, "but I have not lost the war." The murmurs stopped. The air shifted. For the first time since her return, the Queen took control of the room. She turned, facing the highest-ranking generals of the Empire. "You fear the human because he defeated me," she said. "You believe that Earth is beyond our grasp because one man survived." Her gaze hardened. "I say you are all fools." The room froze. A bold statement, one that could cost her everything. But she wasn't finished. "You act as if the butcher is some unkillable monster. He is not." She took a slow step forward. "He bleeds. I felt his ribs crack beneath my fists. I saw the pain in his eyes." Her voice rose, filled with conviction. "He is not invincible." She turned her gaze to the grand strategist. "And I will prove it." A plan to erase a legend. The grand strategist studied her carefully. "You would risk another war?" he asked. Zira's lips curled into a sharp, predatory smile. "This will not be a war," she said. She stepped forward, activating a holographic display. A map of Earth appeared, red markers flashing over key locations. "This will be a hunt." The room leaned in. "The butcher fights from the shadows," Zara continued. "He wins because he chooses when and where to strike." She pointed at the glowing map. "What if we take that choice away from him?" A low murmur spread through the chamber. "We will not attack Earth in full force." Zira's golden eyes gleamed. "That would only prove that we fear him." She turned to her highest-ranking warlords. "Instead, we will send 100 of our most elite assassins. No armies, no fleets." Her voice dropped lower. "No escape for him." She clenched her fists. "We will turn his own tactics against him. We will make him feel what it is like to be hunted." Her next words sent a shiver through the room. "And when I take his head with my own hands, the galaxy will know that the Selverian Empire does not bow to a human." The next war begins. The grand strategist was silent. Then he smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. "Now that is a queen's plan." The elders nodded in approval. And with that, Queen Zara's pride was restored. She was no longer a defeated ruler. She was a hunter. And across the stars, in the ruins of a broken world, the butcher would soon realize that the war was far from over. The choice that changed everything. The ghost in the ruins. The world had gone silent. For the first time in weeks, the skies over Earth were empty. The alien warships that once darkened the heavens were gone, their engines fading into the void beyond the stars. The war was over, or at least that's what the world believed. But deep in the ruins of Los Angeles, one man knew better. The butcher stood on the edge of a collapsed skyscraper, looking out over the broken city. Fires still burned in the streets. Smoke twisted into the sky like dying ghosts. He had won. He had beaten the queen of the Selvarian Empire in single combat. He had forced an empire to retreat. But even as humanity celebrated, even as Earth's survivors cheered and drank and danced in the streets, he didn't feel victorious, because he knew the truth. This wasn't over. Far beyond the stars, Zara was not defeated, and when she returned, she wouldn't come with an army. She would come with something much worse, a personal vendetta. The butcher exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold night air. He wasn't afraid. But he wasn't a fool. Zara had learned her lesson. Next time, she wouldn't fight him honorably. Next time, she wouldn't leave anything to chance. He had a choice to make. Did he wait for her to return? Or did he take the fight to her? The assassins arrive. The choice was made for him. Because she hadn't waited. The attack came at midnight. A thin whistle sliced through the air. Then boom. The rooftop where the butcher had been standing erupted into flames. The shockwave shattered what little glass remained in the broken buildings, sending chunks of concrete raining into the streets below. The butcher moved before he even thought about it, rolling through the explosion and landing in the wreckage of an old hotel. His ears rang. His vision blurred. And then, a whisper. Soft. Close. There you are. A blur of motion. A shadow among shadows. The butcher barely dodged in time as a blade flashed past his throat. The assassin struck without hesitation, moving with unnatural speed. No wasted motion. No hesitation. These weren't Selvarian soldiers. These were hunters. The butcher blocked a second strike, twisting his body in a tight counter-movement. His hand shot out, grabbing his attacker's wrist, only to feel something cold and metallic. A machine. No, a hybrid. The butcher's eyes narrowed. Zara hadn't just sent soldiers. She had sent monsters. The hunt turns both ways. The assassin twisted free, landing in a crouch. In the dim firelight, the butcher finally got a good look at his enemy. A Selvarian, but not fully organic. Its arms were sleek black metal, its eyes a cold, glowing blue. This was not a warrior. This was a weapon. And it was not alone. A second shadow moved from the ruins. Then a third. Then a fourth. More whispers in the dark. The queen sends her regards. The butcher exhaled. Then he moved. The first assassin lunged. He caught its wrist, twisting with brutal efficiency. A crack of metal. The second attacked from behind. The butcher ducked low, driving his elbow into its ribs, feeling a crunch of breaking circuits beneath synthetic skin. The third was fast. Too fast. It slashed at his side, drawing blood. The butcher grunted but kept moving. He wasn't fighting soldiers. He was fighting machines wrapped in flesh. The Selvarian Empire had built assassins designed specifically to kill him. And yet, they weren't winning. Because the butcher didn't fight like a soldier, either. He fought like a man with nothing to lose. He ripped a blade from the first assassin's hand and drove it into its throat. Sparks and blue liquid sprayed from the wound as the assassin crumpled. 1 down. 3 to go. The final warning. By the time the last assassin fell, the butcher was bleeding from multiple wounds, but he was still standing. The queen's hunters had failed. But this was just the beginning. One of the dying assassins reached for him, its voice glitching as it tried to speak. She is coming. The butcher looked down at it, breathing heavily. I know. Then he crushed its skull beneath his boot. The choice that changed everything. At dawn, the butcher stood on the ruins of the Selvarian warship that had brought the assassins. Smoke curled from its shattered engines. Sparks danced along its ruined hull. The resistance fighters stood behind him, watching in awe. General Carter stepped forward, arms crossed. You were right, he said. They're not finished with us. The butcher didn't answer. Instead, he reached down, grabbing the communicator from one of the fallen assassins. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the Selvarian frequency. a direct line to the Queen herself. The channel buzzed. Then, a familiar voice. Cold. Amused. I assume my assassins failed. The butcher exhaled. They did. A low chuckle. Then we are not finished yet. The butcher clenched his jaw. No, he said. Then he did something no human had ever done before. He sent the Queen a warning. Next time, he said, I'm not waiting for you to come to me. There was a pause. Then, Queen Zira laughed. Good. The transmission cut. The butcher dropped the communicator. Then he turned to Carter and the others. I need a ship. Carter frowned. What the hell are you planning? The butcher's gaze burned with a quiet fury. We're taking the fight to them. A silence fell over the group. Then Carter grinned. Well, he said, it's about damn time. And as the sun rose over the ruins of Earth, the butcher took his first step toward the stars, into the heart of the enemy. The butcher's journey begins. The Earth was quiet. For the first time since the invasion, the skies were clear of warships, and the air no longer echoed with the sound of battle. But the butcher was not looking at Earth anymore. He stood inside an underground hangar, surrounded by the last remnants of humanity's resistance. Engineers and soldiers rushed around him, preparing the stolen Salvarian warship for launch. It was a risk. No human had ever traveled into deep Salvarian space before. But the butcher was not like other men. As he stepped forward, General Carter approached him. This is suicide, Carter said. The butcher said nothing. Carter exhaled. You're really doing this. The butcher finally turned to him. His voice was calm. They're not going to stop, Carter. The general nodded slowly. I know. The butcher's jaw tightened. Then it's time we end this. Carter looked at him, seeing not just a soldier, but something more. The butcher was no longer just a man. He was a force. Good luck, Carter said. The butcher didn't respond. He just turned toward the ship, stepping into the stolen alien cockpit. A moment later, the engines roared to life. And then, the butcher left Earth behind. The Queen's ambush. The Salvarian fleet was waiting. Queen Zira stood aboard her flagship, her golden eyes locked onto the holographic display. A single ship, a human pilot. She knew who it was. Her lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile. Just as I expected, she murmured. The grand strategist, standing at her side, observed the readings. He's coming alone. Zira's fingers tightened into a fist. No, she corrected. He's bringing something with him. The grand strategist raised an eyebrow. And what is that? The Queen's smile faded. The death of my empire, if we fail. With a sharp command, she signaled her fleet. All ships, prepare for ambush. The butcher walks into hell. The stolen Salvarian warship drifted through deep space, its silent engines cutting through the void. Inside, the butcher sat in the cockpit, watching the readings. He wasn't alone. His sensors picked them up long before they moved. A trap. Exactly as he expected. His hands flexed. Good. He activated the ship's autopilot, standing up. Slowly, he rolled his shoulders, loosening his muscles. This was never going to be a clean mission. This was going to be a massacre. The ambush. Without warning, the Salvarian fleet attacked. Energy cannons ripped through space, cutting off any escape route. The stolen ship shook violently, alarms screaming. Then, impact. The ship was caught in a tractor beam, pulled toward the waiting Salvarian warship. The butcher exhaled. He let them take him. The Queen and the butcher, face to face again. The air was heavy with tension as the doors to the Salvarian throne room opened. Two massive warriors dragged the butcher forward, his hands chained in Salvarian cuffs. Queen Zira stood waiting. This time, she was not amused. This time, her gaze held something deeper, something almost like respect. But she wouldn't show weakness. Instead, she took a slow step forward. You are either the most fearless warrior I have ever met, she said softly, or the most foolish. The butcher raised his head, meeting her gaze without fear. "You didn't come back to finish Earth," he said. "You came back for me." Ziara didn't deny it. A long silence passed between them. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Ziara asked the one question that had been haunting her since their last fight. "What are you?" The butcher didn't blink. "I'm human." Ziara's jaw tightened. "No," she said. "You are something more." And for the first time, the butcher hesitated. Because deep down, he wasn't sure she was wrong. The truth revealed. The room went still as the grand strategist stepped forward. "I've studied you, human," he said. "Your records, your past, your DNA." The butcher remained silent. And then, the revelation. You shouldn't exist. A slow, chilling realization spread through the room. The butcher was different. Faster, stronger, more resistant to pain than any normal human. Because he wasn't just a soldier. He was the result of something far older than this war. "Your species is evolving," the grand strategist said. He turned to the queen. "This human, this butcher, isn't just one of them. He's what they will all become. The final choice." Silence. Ziara took a slow step back, her mind racing. The butcher wasn't just a warrior. He was the future of humanity. And if her empire didn't stop him now, they never would. A choice lay before her. Kill him now, end the legend. Or, a deep thought crept into her mind. Could she do something far more dangerous? Could she turn him? The butcher watched her carefully. He could see the gears turning in her mind. And then she spoke the words that changed everything. "Fight for me," Ziara said. The butcher narrowed his eyes. "You're serious?" Ziara stepped forward. "I could kill you now. I could burn Earth to the ground." But she smiled slightly. "We both know I won't." She tilted her head. "Because I need you, and you need me." The grand strategist's eyes widened in shock. "Your Majesty." Ziara ignored him. She held the butcher's gaze. "We could end this war here," she said. Or, she extended her hand. "We could rewrite the universe together." The butcher stood still. And for the first time, he had no idea what to do. The war ends, or begins again. The galaxy held its breath. Would the butcher take her hand? Would he end the war? Or would he become something even more dangerous? As he stood there, staring at the queen of the Xelvarian Empire, the fate of humanity itself hung in the balance. And then, the butcher made his choice.